Welcome back to The Heat. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi calls for patience after removing two large currency notes from circulation, causing chaos outside banks and ATM machines. The government said one of the reasons for this policy was to counter fake Indian currency notes. Let's get back to our panel right now. And Sadanand, let me start with you on this issue of fake currency. The Prime Minister also cited the use of black money to finance terrorism and terrorist groups in India. Let's take a listen to what he said. Let's watch.
From across the border, our enemies are printing fake notes and flooding them into our country. Tell me, should our enemies' move be allowed to continue? Shouldn't this be stopped? I want to ask those leaders who are in the fight against militancy, insurgency, and extremism, shouldn't we bring an end to counterfeit notes?
So he says it's part of the war on terror as well.
You know, it's always difficult to refute national security arguments. To be fair, there's certainly an element of that. We know that there has been counterfeiting of Indian currency, particularly by Pakistan and its intelligence agency, the ISI. Now, the senior bankers I have spoken with about this do not believe that this is on a scale that would even remotely justify this kind of action. It's an ongoing, low-level problem, is how it has been described to me.
Swati, do you think that this is a problem for India, the fact that its currency is being counterfeited? The Indian currency is the 9th most counterfeited currency in the world. Does the Prime Minister have a point there?
So Sadanand just almost said exactly what I would have wanted to say, which is that that's a completely untestable hypothesis. I can't say anything about it. What I can say, though, is that if we are also looking at sort of getting rid of counterfeited money, why would we still sort of go about it in this absolutely haphazard manner where overnight the currency suddenly becomes unusable? That doesn't make sense at all still. And that's why I think a lot of it is this fear, stoking these fears and trying to make these jingoistic statements, which we heard even in the sort of previous months, jingoistic statements like we're going to do surgical strikes on Pakistan. And it seems more like political gimmickry to me. It doesn't seem like it's something that seems to bear any kind of burden of proof.
All right, Samir, what's your view on this? Is the Prime Minister throwing in a healthy dose of national security concerns here to make his point?
You know, we have seen all successful political leaders have deployed a degree of nationalist and sub-nationalist elements into their communication. And that's why I'm saying that, you know, maybe the three of us in this studio are the odd ones out. And come the elections in India's northern provinces, and you just might find that we maybe, all three of us may be looking at a very different political picture. So I am not going to comment on people's communication strategies, but I do believe that there is a thinking in his coterie which tells him that this is one good way of justifying what you've done. And I agree with Swati that if this was a concern, and I agree with Sadanand, if this was a concern, then again, you have not necessarily addressed them when you have reprinted new currency this time around once again. So I think there is, of course, the threat from Pakistan of counterfeit of currency and of funding disruptive elements in India. I am sure it is going to take a hit. I'm sure certain other insurgent groups in India's eastern Red Corridor are going to be hit by this particular action of the government, but all of us have been hit by this action. So they're not the only ones who've been hit by this.
Sutherland, there are all kinds of corruption around the world. One of the most common kinds of corruption that we find in many countries in the world, including here in the United States, is, I guess, what we call crony capitalism, you know, where well-connected political individuals get these lucrative government contracts without, you know, tender procedures being observed. Do you see a lot of that in India?
Yes, and to be fair to this government, it has come down in the last 2 years. Of course, we don't have, you know, we basically have anecdotal evidence. But there has been a sense that the government is no longer, at least at the very highest levels, running a pay-for-play operation the way we saw in the last. But the issue is not crony capitalism as much as how do you fix this problem? And you can fix this problem either by reducing government discretion, allowing the market to function, and getting the government out of the way of business, or you can say that you're going to launch a war against corruption, and that effectively means that you're going to make the state even more heavy-handed in this sort of pursuit of crooks.
Yeah, but if you're talking about big infrastructure projects, the money is going to have to come from the government, isn't it?
Well, partly. I think in there's some of the most successful infrastructure projects in India have really been public-private partnership.
Right.
For example, the airports in Delhi and Mumbai.
No, I also believe that if they're really serious about this war on corruption, they must start fixing the politics and the elections. By the time an Indian senator or Indian parliamentarian reaches the parliament building, he's already sold many times over for the election that he has run and won. So I think campaign finance and the politics of elections need to be fixed. I think it begins there. Public finance for infrastructure projects eventually are also controlled and managed by the same people who had to fight elections and who were paid by many to win that election. And I think unless, if you're serious about this, this is the time, and I would support the government. If they go ahead and if they say that we are going to reform campaign finance and if we are going to tackle the politics of elections, yes, I think it's a good move. They should do it. I won't be surprised if something like this is on the anvil as well, but I hope it is.
Swati, what do you think, that this government needs to adopt a more, I guess, multi-pronged effort to tackle corruption rather than just taking certain currency notes out of circulation?
Absolutely. And I think I want to get back to the first point that Sadanand had raised right at the beginning of the show, which was that should this even be a priority? I mean, yes, it would be good if they tried to fix some of the policies which create a lot of room for essentially arbitrary actions by small officers. So that could definitely be done. But much more importantly, this government also came on an agenda, on a mandate of essentially development. And that is something which we haven't seen big movement on. That is something we haven't seen big movement on in terms of education policy, in terms of sort of rural welfare programs. And that's something which the focus needs to come back to that.
I want to get back to something you said, Swati. I think it was you who said this at the beginning of the show, and that was the issue of taxes and who pays taxes in India. The number of people who pay taxes in India vary from 1% to less than 3%, depending whom you're listening to at the time. But that is a low number, no matter what it is. Why do so few people pay taxes?
So one, of course, is that a lot of people are just below the threshold of when they have to pay taxes. And there are also a lot of tax incentives. I feel sort of horrible calling it incentives. There are a lot of exceptions built into the whole system which allow the government officially that it publishes a report every year saying that we're foregoing a certain amount of revenue. And that revenue is essentially absolutely huge compared to any kind of recovery they're going to get from sort of banning notes which are high denomination.
Sadanand, looking for, you want to say something?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, just one clarification. Those numbers you're talking about are income tax.
Yeah, income tax.
And the main exemption is agricultural income. Most Indians are farmers, and agricultural income is exempt. Now, many
It's not
Indians.
just agricultural income tax, it's corporations as well as high net worth individuals, which are part of this entire scheme.
But I think the major reason why India has such a small number who pay any tax at all. But apart from that, I mean, many Indians do pay taxes, but they pay other taxes. They pay sales taxes, they pay taxes on goods. So the question really is, why don't more Indians pay income tax?
Income tax, yeah.
Now, one of the things that the government says it wants to do here through this move is move more of the economy into a kind of electronic payment so that the tax authorities will be better able to crack down on people who should be paying taxes and who are not.
It's a great point you make. Yeah, it was something I was going to talk to you about, and that is there are many developing countries in the world which are trying to move to a cashless society. I mean, even places like Somalia, Kenya, they're using cell phones and smart apps to make transactions. Can India not go that way?
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
The question is that, is this the way to go about it? Is this something that should happen naturally over time, where you put in place incentives?
Right.
Or do you essentially put a gun to the head of your people and say, you know, now you need to switch? And you have to understand that there are costs over here, right? For instance, there's a 2% transaction fee often. So
Yes.
And in many parts of India, the infrastructure simply doesn't exist. So perhaps this is going to be a jolt to the system, and it's going to kind of increase that. But the question is this how one goes about it?
I think there was also, and maybe I'm wrong, and this is just my thought that as Sadanand was speaking, it came to me. Maybe there's an overestimation of this whole trinity of Jandhan, Aadhaar, and mobile, this unique identity, mobile phones, and the bank accounts that they've opened. There's an overestimation of the efficacy of that trinity, and maybe someone also led the authorities to believe that India is ready to make that move and migrate to a cashless system. Currently it's less than 5% of the transactions. I'm not so sure that we are ready, and I'm not so sure that we reach many people who still rely primarily on cash.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be a while. You can't shock them into adopting a certain process.
Okay, Swati, you get the last word. I've got 20 seconds.
Sure. I'm just going to say that there's this presumption here that somehow technology solves all problems, in which we hear a lot in India. And one of the cases was the Aadhaar, the national identification system that they were putting in place. And what happened was that it actually perpetuated many of the same social inequities of omission of really low-income people from those identification cards being issued. So it somehow is not going to fix the problem immediately. We have to get at the root causes of these problems, not really say that somehow technology is going to fix everything immediately.